What does a spiral staircase in Santa Fe, New Mexico, snails, and plant tendrils have to do with creation or evolution? And what in the world does this have to do with the First Great Commandment? Well, stay tuned because you're going to find out today.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Life's Key 3 podcast. Hey, if you are new around here, or if you have been listening for a while and you haven't actually taken the next step, I invite you to do so today. Don't put it off another day. You need to go to the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for the weekly newsletter, High Impact. There are resources and information that you're going to find on there that complements and adds to what you're going to hear on the podcast. And you're going to be able to find out there's a whole lot more going on than just this podcast. We are tracking through on the Thursday episodes with this idea of how do we teach our children to live out that first great commandment that Jesus taught, to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, and all of our strength. How do we make that relevant and understandable? And so it doesn't just seem like, yeah, that's a great thing to say, but all that really requires is a certain set of theological beliefs, because it goes a whole lot deeper than that. And what I want us to look at today is we're going to start looking at our humanity. Over the last several weeks, we looked at our capacities and in different ways. And today we're going to start looking at how do we interpret our humanity, just being human. What does that mean? Because it sounds like if we're to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, that pretty much encompasses all of our humanity. So how do we make that real? Well, in order to do that, I think we kind of have to go back to our origins. This is not going to be a podcast episode that delves into rock layers and dinosaur bones and carbon dating testing and all of that. All of that has its place and its purpose, but I want us to look at our origins in a broader framework than that important but still narrow interpretation. At the beginning of the podcast, I talked about a spiral staircase in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and snails and plant tendrils, and what does that have to do? Well, here's the thing. If you aren't familiar, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, there is a woodworking mystery that people still come from all over the world to see. And you know what? People still don't really know how it was built. Here's the short story. There was a chapel, the Loretto Chapel, that was commissioned in 1873 and completed 5 years later. But there was a bit of a problem. No one had built a way to access the choir loft. So it was up there, but you had no way to get there. The nuns there consulted with many builders, but nobody could figure out how to build stairs to the loft. Well, the sisters committed to praying for a solution for 9 straight days. And on the very last day, a stranger appeared and offered a solution. Using no nails or other hardware, this unknown carpenter built this beautiful staircase and then disappeared. Today, this chapel is a museum, and as I said, people come from all over the world to view this mysterious and magnificent work of art. And if you don't happen to have Santa Fe, New Mexico in your travel plans anytime soon, you can find pictures of this online. We don't build a lot of spiral staircases in the U.S. anymore. Even though they're very space efficient, they have definite limitations. But you know what? Spirals are one of the most common shapes in all of nature. Some say it's the most common shape. Now, I don't know that we have a way to nail that down to be an absolute fact, but what we do know as a fact is that spirals are a consistent form that shows up in nature. DNA, chameleon tails, ammonite rocks, plant tendrils, snails, spirals in the Milky Way galaxy are all incredibly repetitive and cover from the very minutest matter that we can't even see with our eyes to what we can look up and see in the skies. Is this happenstance or is this evidence? Does it really matter what we believe about our origins? Well, I think it does. And again, not just in some of the narrow ways that we may tend to define that, but to look at, were we designed or did we derive from some other process or substance? You know, science is possible because of fixed natural laws. For example, water has a consistent boiling point. Now, there are some differences in that exact boiling point temperature depending on where you are and sea level. However, even though there are those minor differences, there's still a consistency to that. You know, I don't know that I think that the world would just kind of fall apart if this one fixed natural law just went on the frets and all of a sudden we no longer could consistently rely on water boiling at the same temperature. How many of our labs and factories and water treatment plants and you name it, well, for that matter, our tea kettles that we want to use, cooking that we want to do in our kitchens or our restaurants would just totally fall apart if one day water decided to boil at 30 degrees Celsius and other days it decided to boil at 800 degrees Celsius. I mean, the world would just shut down. But there is a continuity and a consistency just in this one aspect of life that water consistently boils at this same temperature. Again, leaving room for variances according to sea level. Why is that? I mean, where did that come from? How did that come to be? I mean, did the water molecules all get together one year and say, you know, I think we've decided that this, you know, we took a vote and this is the temperature that we have decided that we are going to start. I mean, where did that fixed, simple, and yet profoundly impactful natural law come from? Evolution doesn't always really account for things like that. It gets into other things that have to do with animals and humans, but some of these more basic and obvious kind of things, there's just no addressing these things. But if there was a creator who is a God of order and reliability and wants us to be able to count on him and governs over an orderly universe, well, then it makes sense that water has a consistent boiling point. You know, there's a benchmark in science that says there has to be reliability. If a person or a group has an experiment and it produces certain results, one of the tests of science is we want other people who don't have any connection to the first group or the first person to be able to duplicate that experiment and it should come out with the same results. And if that doesn't happen, then that's like, okay, wait a minute, why not? And in order for something to be shown as being valid and reliable, then several different groups or individuals need to be able to duplicate that experiment and consistently produce the same results. We have fixed natural laws that govern the world, and typically we do not live trying to defy those. We don't say, you know, I'm just not a big fan of gravity. It's just kind of a pain. And, I'm just going to live like I think somebody just made that up. I think they're just trying to squelch my freedom and my self-expression. And I'm just going to decide that doesn't apply to me. We don't do that. And one of the reasons we don't is because, for example, in the law of gravity, we would experience the consequences of breaking that law very quickly. There are other fixed laws that God has set in place to govern how the world works, and not just the natural world and the physical world, but how it governs the spiritual world. But the difference is that sometimes we don't experience the consequences of breaking those laws. We might not even experience them fully in our lifetime. Generations later may actually be the ones who experience that. And there's a sort of arrogance that when we only look at what we can measure in our immediacy, either in times of days or weeks, or even if we look at it and say, well, we're just going to measure it in our lifetime or within a span of a generation or two. What is a couple of generations in the span of just recorded human history? It's like nothing. And this is one of the reasons both why we need to have history and understand that, because again, what do we see? We see repetitive patterns in people that continue to show up throughout history in all geographical locations and among a wide diversity of people groups, just like we see patterns in nature like spirals that continue to show up. In December of 2016, an American Museum of Natural History article posited that there are about 18,000 bird species that exist today. That doesn't even count the ones who have gone extinct. And yet Genesis chronicles creation with astonishing brevity. I mean, the creation of birds and marine life are summarized in only 85 words. I mean, humans, we at least get double that amount. And it's interesting that 3 times in one verse, God repeats that people were created. And 3 times in 2 verses, he says that they were made in his image. Anytime that the Bible repeats something, it's kind of like we need to go sit up and listen here. Take notice. This is extraordinary valuable. You need to really pay attention to this. If we were designed, then that indicates, of course, a designer. And if we were derived, that has entirely different implications. So I want you to think about some things that maybe you haven't thought about before in terms of the whole, origins of humanity and where did we come from. So, for example, if we were designed, which I, of course, believe that we were, it means that we resulted from intentional planning. However, if we look at the other big idea, which is that people were just derived from a process, a biological evolutionary process, then basically people were random. Design says that a person, a being was present. I don't mean person in terms of a human being, but I mean in terms of a personality, a who was present if there was design, providing humanity with an immediate relationship. But if people were derived, well, there was no other person in the sense of a personality that was present. There was no need or opportunity for an immediate relationship. One of the things with evolution is looking at this macro or micro evolution over a period of time. And sometimes it's just a matter of looking at just the logistics. How is it that enough Homo sapiens changed at the exact same rate in the exact same geographical location both in terms of numbers of males and females, that allow the species to continue to populate and exist. There's just some logistical math with that doesn't really ever get accounted for. But because when we look at creation, we see that when human beings showed up, there was a God who was present, and they had an immediate relationship that was there. And not just somebody else, but a wise, caring, loving God who was able to give information and instruction about how life was going to happen. Another difference is that design gives us a source for understanding ourself and the world. In evolutionary ideas, there's really no help in figuring out oneself. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And there's really no help in figuring out the world. What's the big purpose of the world? How is the world supposed to work? Why are we here? We can come up with ideas for ourselves, and by a matter of sheer force of numbers, be able to say, well, here's our purpose. But you know what? If we just look at the world today, the world is not all in agreement about why we are here and what our purpose is, or what morality is, or ethics, or anything like that. So why haven't we yet evolved to a point that we have continuity just in some of these big, major ways, much less in all of the little minor ways that we show up in life? Another difference is that when we look at the idea that people were designed, what does that say about us? It says that we were desired. We were intentional. We were wanted from the very beginning. In evolutionary thought, people were dispensable. I mean, there was no great who that was saying, I want you, I desire you. And the implications of this in our thinking are really, truly profound. When we read in the creation account in Genesis that we were made in God's image, this doesn't mean that we were miniature gods possessing all of God's capabilities. When we say about a young child, oh, he looks just like his grandfather, or he's a spitting image of his father, we're not saying that he's like a mini grandpa or a mini dad. We see similarities, but not sameness. And just like God, we have similarities, but we don't have sameness. We have similarities in that we are relational, we are thinking, we are capable of choice, we are able to act. We are also triune. We have a body, a soul, and a spirit that mirrors the Trinity of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Unlike God, we are limited in our power, our knowledge, and our ability. We also have a dependency on our environment and others. And we have the capacity to choose to sin. We are also bounded by time and space. So, this idea about where we came from is something that is significant for us. And sometimes as Christians, it's easy to just kind of think, okay, we're just going to teach our kids that, yes, we were created by God, and anything else that says otherwise is just stupid. And, we don't really have to dive into that. But we do need to have these conversations with our kids from the time that they're young. And as they get older, that we dive into, what does this really mean? What's the significance of that? Because we're not going to be able to really answer the questions that they will encounter in their life by just saying, well, anything else is just stupid thinking and you just don't need to pay any attention to that. That is not going to work well over the long haul. So I've shared a few things with you today, hopefully that you can think about for yourself, and you can also talk about with your kids. And in different ways, you can start talking about your kids with this when they are very, very young. And as they get older, don't be afraid to enter into the conversations. As a matter of fact, don't just wait for them to initiate this. You take the initiative to talk about what's the ramifications for us as human beings and what we truly believe about our origins and how it impacts how we see ourselves, how we see our purpose, our responsibilities to a creator or not, to ourselves and to others in the world. And also, what does this say about moral and ethical laws, principles? Where do they come from? How do we know what they are? Do they even exist? We don't want to be afraid to enter into the conversations that explore other ideas and not just taking an easy way out of just dismissing them all by saying, well, that's just stupid and they're just wrong. All right, that's going to wrap us up here for today. Again, today's the day. If you've been thinking about doing this for a while, you've been meaning to do it, and you just keep kind of putting it off, because I understand life is busy. Maybe you're going for a jog right now. Maybe you're washing dishes. Maybe you are driving home, or you're sitting on the highway because you're stuck in traffic or whatever, and you're like, I can't get to my phone right now or my laptop and go to that website. Just make it a priority that as soon as you get a moment, you get back from that run, you put that last dish in the dishwasher, you get home, and before you get out of your car, you pull out your phone or whatever, and you just go to the website, stephaniepresents.com, sign up for the newsletter there, and that gives us an opportunity to move from having a monologue, which is kind of what a podcast is, to having a dialogue. And it helps you to have other ways to engage with me as well, because I love being able to hear from my listeners. All right, my friend, remember this, because it's true. You have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.